Welcome to the second webinar in our Humaculture Perspective series on optimal behavior. Our first webinar introduced some of the basic concepts that we're going to cover today and throughout the rest of the series. This, I think, is an exciting topic for us, which is focusing on how do you make meaningful behavior changes within organizations, which then leads to optimal behaviors for the people and the organization. If you've attended one of our prior sessions, you may know us, some of us. We're excited to introduce Colin and Hanlie to our series and invite them to join us. And we're glad to welcome them as our guests. Colin is a fellow actuary. He lives in London, England, and loves his beer and working it off in the gym. He is always in search of the perfect pint, but if they do find it, they are sworn to not admit it because the search would end. Colin brings a decidedly analytical approach to his work with Virtuosa team and its research arm, BratLab, and has been instrumental in developing an approach to behavior change that's firmly rooted in science.
Yeah, and Hanlie, we've come to know as the part of the team who really makes all of this great BratLab research relatable. She's a social scientist focused on behavior change and a system strategist applying those behavior change strategies to some of the most challenging behavioral problems. Hanlie grew up in South Africa, and she tells us that she loves to travel, and we know it's true. She has worked on 4 continents and has traveled to 24 countries and counting.
Hey, thanks for those introductions, Steve and Wes. Can I just say it's great to be back again, to be together again for the second webinar in the series. With regard to introducing Steve, I've come to appreciate Steve as a colleague who's passionate about achieving optimal behavior and unusually has conducted research in this area. What I also love is he loves good food and he's a connoisseur of craft beer. He has said that there are 4 microbreweries within 20 minutes of his home, so he and I are definitely going to have to meet up at some stage, and he also enjoys homebrews with his friends.
And we've just learned about Wes that he has the ability to bring his experience in managing his 7,500 square foot garden organically to help bring things to life with the humaculturist perspective. It's great how he's able to see how research applies naturally in everyday life.
So thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A rather than the chat, so we are better able to see them. We know your time is valuable, so let's get started. Wes, let's start by thinking about behavior change within the framework of the 7 dimensions of humaculture.
Great idea. So every dimension of the 7 dimensions has an impact on all the others. In fact, that's the idea behind humaculture. The dimensions provide a much better way to understand the nature of organizations and then help us make decisions about organizations or business in a more holistic, complete, and effective way. Decisions and plans that are made in a vacuum of just looking at one single dimension, for instance, without fully understanding the influence that each of the other dimensions has, aren't likely to lead to the greatest success. And horticulturists understand this principle, and they rely on expertise in each of the dimensions of horticulture to shape their overall approach. And effective organizational leaders have to really do the same thing. Great leaders are going to think in a 7-dimensional way. Today, we're talking about spaces, and that's an important aspect of the organization itself. And we're going to explore the impact that those spaces or that spaces aspect has on the organization, on people, the created value, and the other dimensions.
Thanks. So what do you mean by that?
Well, Steve, an organization, as you know, is created to achieve a purpose, just as a farm is created to grow crops. The farm needs sufficient space, soil conditions, soil fertility, et cetera, to produce those crops. And the most successful farms also plan the layout of the available space to encourage the best possible yields. A manufacturing organization needs a facility, sufficient assets to acquire raw materials, capital for machinery, et cetera. And so there's a fundamental requirement for spaces there as well. But how those spaces are arranged, conditions like ventilation, lighting, et cetera, all impact how people respond and work in those spaces. Did you notice the photo on our cover and now up on the left-hand side of the photo above? This plant is what a horticulturist would call root bound. And it's obvious that it has grown precisely to the shape of the pot, which in this case is the space the plant was provided. So in this case, the space, the pot, had a very profound impact on the plant itself. Spaces impact people just as dramatically, and many times we don't really fully recognize it.
That makes sense to me. It's an issue I have seen in many industries and in many contexts. For example, in office spaces, there's been a shifting tide for some time now from offices to more of open spaces, which has implications for the way that people interact, their ability to concentrate, and their well-being, as we'll discuss more today. From a workplace safety and injury prevention perspective, ergonomics has a huge impact on the workplace injuries and beyond in both active jobs such as manufacturing or construction, as well as more sedentary jobs such as desk jobs. Wes?
I'm sorry. Lost my place here where we were. Cyboran. Oh, here we go. So yeah, I'm sorry, Steve. So why is that?
Well, today and throughout the series, we want to explore what an organization can do to more naturally influence people to behave optimally and to do so consistently. This webinar will focus on the context of spaces. Our colleagues from Virtuosa team have some amazing expertise in how spaces influence behavior. That's why we've asked Colin and Hanlie to join us. So Hanlie, what are some ways spaces may have an influence on behavior?
Well, today we want to discuss 3 ways spaces can influence behavior. Many spaces don't support well-being, and some may actually lead to sickness. There are also ways in which spaces can hinder personal performance. And finally, some spaces may be counterproductive to carrying out our intended tasks or processes. Once we've explored the potential flaws and challenges, we will discuss how to create spaces that can lead to optimal behaviors in a thriving organization.
That sounds great, Hanlie. Let's start by taking a closer look at how spaces are related to health and well-being. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. Well, many offices and typical places of work, even your home office, reflect a bias towards energy conservation rather than promoting healthy physical activity. So while we recognize the importance of physical activity in health and well-being, our workplaces often discourage healthy activity. Sitting rather than standing, being sedentary rather than moving at regular intervals, taking elevators rather than stairs. Even when we travel, we use moving walkways in airports. Trucking is another example of an industry where physical breaks and movement need to be encouraged. Of course, manufacturing plants do incorporate physicality, but then there are other potential health-related health concerns.
Yeah, that's right. It's not just that they're not encouraging well-being activities, as Hanlie said in the opening, they can also make us ill. Research shows that an astonishing 30% of our new and remodeled offices still show signs of what's called sick building syndrome, and that's just buildings that make you sick, quite literally, with 10 to 30% of occupants reporting related symptoms, which include asthma and allergies. A lack of natural light, for instance, creates symptoms like eye strain, dry eyes, and headaches. Headaches can also be caused by improper temperature controls.
That's right. Most buildings are constructed to place the elevator at the center of the lobby in the middle of the building and move the stairs all the way to the end of the hallway near the exit door. While this makes sense from an evacuation standpoint, it certainly doesn't encourage using the stairs rather than the elevator. As we all know, people do what's easiest. However, taking the stairs can save time, is generally the healthier option, and even that minimal activity can help performance in many ways.
Interesting, Steve. So how is that true?
So it's true that a great many things affect our performance, and physical space that we occupy is no exception. Indeed, I think its influence may surprise a few people. For instance, for around 40% of surveyed employees indicate that the temperature of their workplace is not to their liking and not conducive to their optimal working. A further 40% also feel that noise levels prevent them from working effectively. And many examples here often relate to workers in those large open plan offices trying to do detailed or focused work. Research also shows us that poor air quality reduces productivity by up to 11%. So in summary, when we don't feel our best, our performance suffers and productivity is reduced.
Exactly. Other factors can also hamper performance. Many people believe that music may enhance performance. Research, however, is inconsistent, showing our performance may be hindered when any sort of music is playing when compared to performance in a quiet setting. Of course, this is highly personal and to the person and to the task.
That is interesting. So, as you both have mentioned before, it's important to understand from research and science what is really driving or impacting performance. Many people accept as sort of an axiom that music, at least certain music, improves performance. It is amazing to see that the actual scientific studies show mixed results at best.
Yeah, and just thinking through this, I like to really very often listen to smooth jazz or classical while working. But I guess I'm kind of questioning that now a little bit. Maybe I need to pay more attention to my performance and whether I'm really doing better or not. Or maybe like Colin and the beer, I don't want to pay attention to it because then I'll have to give up my music. Hanlie, you mentioned earlier that spaces may be built in a way that really don't support efficient task completion. Can you elaborate on that for us?
So, Wes, I suppose the most obvious example may be manufacturing plants. Illogical material flow, poor layout of manufacturing lines, or poor organization of internal logistics. This can result in congestion for the movement of materials and workers, long production cycles, and more frequent accidents. Similarly, office spaces are often designed with barriers to interaction, limit the ability to concentrate, or maybe just limit basic activity. How many offices have you worked in where there's only one printer or copier? Or you may have experienced a retail setting with a cramped checkout area that creates long customer lines.
Yeah, those are important aspects to consider. So what we're saying that is, for example, when a task requires concentration, it's important to have access to a quiet atmosphere, which makes sense, but often in modern office design or workplace design is not available. Job function and task type determine the best office type when you consider the level of concentration and focus. The requirement for learning and knowledge sharing, as well as co-presence, collaboration, team satisfaction, will also shape the ideal office environment.
And another example is clutter. Clutter has been shown to result in reduced efficiency, lower persistence, increased frustration, and even weariness. I think that's because it challenges our sense of self-control and reflects the inability to control our environment, and that depletes mental resources. But there's one interesting exception that I'll share a little bit later.
I can relate to the problem of clutter. There have been times in my own career where I've let my desk get away from me because I was so busy. Then I realized I had to take time to organize my desk so that I could be more productive.
Yeah, and just listening to this, we knew that the virtuosity team approach is going to be really well suited for the Humaculturist to employ, and this discussion is really helping us understand the potential hindrances that can come from poorly designed spaces. In fact, as we said before, that's precisely the point. Each of the 7 dimensions impacts all the others. The real assets, the available space, and tilt of the soil are important, but the intangible asset dimension, the arrangement, layout of plants, et cetera, in that available space is clearly impactful as well.
Great point, Wes. So, Hanlie, how can organizations help people achieve meaningful, sustainable change through the designing of the space?
Steve, as we said in our introductory webinar, we believe the key to driving optimal behavior is to understand the influences that act on people as experienced through the 4 powers or forces and the four contexts in which those powers operate. Those forces and contexts in which they occur are largely invisible and unnoticed, and they are extremely powerful. Remember how we used the example of water defines a fish's life, but they swim around blissfully unaware of the context that gives them that life. The water needs to be clean, the temperature needs to be appropriate, the size and surroundings impact the quality of life of that fish. Even when it comes to desired light, it may vary between species, so it's very important to make adjustments for that.
So your comment about the desired light, for instance, reminds me of an example we use often when we're talking about the layout or the arrangement of spaces. You know, if you're growing in the northern hemisphere, the sun always sweeps to the south. And so if you're going to grow two different species of plants, one grows tall, one grows short, but they both have a high demand for sunshine. If you plant that shorter species on the north side of the taller species, it'll be starved for light. So it's really important to reverse that arrangement. And that arrangement impacts very, very much how they grow.
Wes, I love these horticultural analogies because transporting them into the workplace is just enlightening. So when you're thinking about change and improving the situation, the key is to intentionally create conditions for change to happen more naturally and consistently. So just following this analogy through, it might be adjusting the temperature of the water or changing the quality of the light hitting the bulb, something like that. Organizations must then understand and use our formula for change to rebalance the forces that are acting on people across the four contexts. So understanding these concepts and employing them increases the likelihood of behavior change happening more naturally, or at least with less resistance. So we're talking about the context of space today. It's about understanding the role that the physical environment has on us and our productivity.
And I really like this analogy of the fish in the fishbowl and how they don't even realize how that environment is impacting them. It happens to us all the time in our work as well. So Hanlie, can you tell us more about how organizations can design spaces that more effectively promote the desired behaviors?
Yes, I'm sure that many of us have heard of standing desks or exercising workstations or furniture that allows for regular stance changes. But there are other potential ways to add features to our spaces to encourage healthier behaviors. Two examples are meditation nooks and nap rooms. So amongst many other benefits, meditating regularly can increase hypertension by 40%, as an example. Then when it comes to napping, it's shown to be more effective than caffeine for verbal, motor, and perceptual memory. According to NASA, a 26-minute nap can boost productivity by 54% and alertness by 54 to 100%. However, sometimes we can't change spaces, so we can also consider the design of existing spaces themselves. For example, if you happen to be in a tall building, consider making the stairs more attractive. Often these stairwells, Steve, like you indicated earlier, are viewed more as an emergency exit, rather. And it would be helpful to make some adjustments around that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the stairs. In my work, I've had a client who actually slowed the elevator down and dressed up the stairwells with murals and posted big news first in the stairwells to encourage use of the stairs. Using stairs is generally quicker than waiting for the elevator, and even that little bit of activity can help clarity of thinking, performance, and health. Our graphic here is a pretty cool way to make stairs more attractive. Each small step really begins to add up in making a difference on our health. Colin, what about other aspects of spaces impact our health?
So we did some research with an organization that's specializing in creating high performance working environments and discovered that by optimizing temperature, it's possible to reduce headaches by up to 80% in the more than 1/3 or so of the population that suffers. That's a quite astonishing statistic, which for me is only challenged by the fact that if you give two people control of the same thermostat, it will be continually fought over, which does nobody any favors. In fact, great example is I used to work in an office in Chicago where I knew exactly who was in the office when I walked in just by the temperature of the room.
That's pretty amazing. And these are great examples to think about. So it'll no doubt have, help all organizations if people choose healthier behaviors and become healthier. That in the long term, that's very true. But what about the short-term results organizations might be interested in, like specific performance, personal performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Where spaces can have a profound and immediate impact on our performance. So a 23% improvement in productivity is reported from good lighting and access to views, for instance. And how about this one? This will blow your mind. Our modern workplaces often insulate us from fresh air and can recirculate airborne diseases. By improving the quality of air and speed of circulation, you can reduce absenteeism by more than a third. As a final example, electronics factory in the Netherlands recorded an 8% increase in the speed of manual assembly just by changing the lighting to a new optimal setting.
And also earlier, I mentioned that clutter and messiness challenge your sense of self-control and reflect an inability to control your environment, like further depleting your mental resources. The fact is that less mess makes you 1.5 times more persistent, less frustrated, and less tired. However, I mentioned earlier that there would be a little quirk in there. In some instances, it has been shown that mess will increase creativity, sometimes as much as 5 times, because of the affective and divergent thinking created by the cluttered environment.
That is interesting. Is that because of the visual cue or the natural production of oxygen?
So Steve, I think you're talking about adding plants, because we've also found that one of the biggest impact on performance and reduction of fatigue by up to 20% happens when you include plants in a building. The reviewed studies suggest that indoor plants can provide psychological benefits with like stress reduction and also increased pain tolerance, maybe for those days that your boss is a pain in the neck.
So the key is to understand that there are several aspects to spaces that support innovation and performance. What about, Colin, what about just getting the tasks completed? Or is it Hanlie, maybe?
That's for me, yes, absolutely. Office types are also influential in task completion. Although individual differences in concentration demands of the job interact with office type alone is a strong predictor of the health and performance of employees. Small open plan offices, by that I mean 4 to 6 people, those environments are often more beneficial than these larger open plan office environments for task completion. Employees reported lower distraction, lower cognitive stress, and generally performed better in these environments.
And it's worth drawing out, it's not just about setting up the spaces, it's also having control of those spaces. People are happier and more self-confident when they feel that they can set up their working environments to complete tasks in the way that they perceive them to be best. More personal control over the physical workspace, which would include adjustment of the working environment, furnishings, work tools to be modified or manipulated, choice of time and location and work and flexible work programs, also just easy access to meeting spaces, all lead to a higher perceived group cohesiveness and job satisfaction.
That is interesting, Colin. There was a study conducted by the Work and Families Institute way back in 2008. It was influential in a lot of the healthy enterprise research that I had done, where they tested the impact of an effective workplace. They found that people working in high overall effective workplaces had twice as good a health outcomes, 15 times better engagement, and 8 times higher job satisfaction than those working in low overall effective workplaces. One of the elements in their definition of an effective workplace was autonomy, or the flexibility to determine how, when, and with what you need to get the job done.
Yeah, that's interesting, and kind of the corollary to autonomy is that the people doing the work often have really good ideas about how that work should be done, and so it's pretty important to listen to those people who actually complete the task when we're designing or modifying workspaces. I
agree that due consideration needs to be given to the outcome you are trying to achieve in the design and the design of the space and the feedback of those who are actually working in there. As you are seeking a creative, are you seeking a creative work environment, more of a manufacturing workflow environment, or one that requires significant concentration? The space needs to be designed accordingly.
That's right. Give people a choice over how and when they use their physical workspace in pursuit of their work goals, as opposed to being controlled by the space or an organizational policy. There's a strong beneficial link also between the degree of environmental control, and this includes personalization of space, and the outcomes like psychological stress, group and individual performance, speed of business processes, and also sick building syndrome. In summary, spaces should be designed with tasks in mind. And environmental control is a key capability that organizations should invest in to enhance their competitive advantage.
That's great. Wes, can you wrap up for us?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's obvious that there are many behaviors we know we should probably work to change, each of us. We also know it's often maddeningly hard to do that. And at the organizational level, we consistently see that people behave inconsistently at best, even to our greatest effort to help them change their behaviors. So Colin and Hanlie, through Virtuosity Team's behavior change framework and formula, bring us a really effective science-based approach to helping people make meaningful, sustainable changes. Today, we focused on the context of spaces, and it's obvious to me that there's a lot we can do to improve our health, our performance, our productivity, etc., by understanding the real impact of the spaces in which we live and work. So, Steve, what will we be doing and discussing in our upcoming webinars?
Well, we've got 4 more sessions as part of this series, and we'll go every other month on the 3rd Thursday of the month. Today, we've covered spaces context, and next we'll discuss the context of self, social context, and the systems context. And then we'll wrap it all up, talk about how to reap the fruits of optimal behaviors through all that we've discussed over the first 5 sessions. As we go through the topics in these webinars to address the interaction of the context, such as how spaces influence social interaction through the design of the office. The contexts don't exist independently; they each influence each other. So let's start with let's go to some of the questions that we had. Please feel free to add to the Q&A if you have any questions. You talked about the benefits of having plants. Do you still get some of the benefits of having fake plants in the office?
Well, as you can imagine, Steve, I would imagine that you still get the psychological benefits of seeing the greenery and the beauty of that, but I would not say that you would be getting the physical benefits of that. Good question.
Plastic doesn't produce much oxygen, does it?
Well, I've heard about stairs and walking up and down hills as a commonality in blue zones. How does creating spaces relate to longevity of life? Colin, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. So let's be clear, the spaces themselves don't create the longevity. The spaces are responsible for the influence to do something. So what we're looking to do is to get the spaces to influence us towards a behavior that we're interested in. So in this case, walking upstairs or going up and down hills, if you're successful in influencing yourself through the spaces, for instance, to take more exercise, then the research tells us that it's about a 30% improvement in longevity. That's pretty huge related to exercise. If you're just successful in getting to move more regularly, so get up and stand up and move around and so on, then there's still, according to research, there's still a strong, significant impact on longevity. So yes, there is research there that's positive.
Great. Are there any studies regarding how much of an impact having a gym or a healthy snack options in the workplace have?
I'll take this one as well. Again, I mean, the same principles apply. If you just put a gym into your environment or just introduce healthy snacks, but don't have a context for it, it's not clear to the people in the building why you've introduced those things, then actually very little will probably happen. the value comes when you follow our formula for change. So if you're promoting the value of exercise or the value of healthy eating to the individuals, if you're creating motivation for people to attend the gym or eat the healthy food, then you're going to start seeing change happening. If you remove the barriers for people to participate in or engage in in those new things that you're introducing to the workplace and keeping it in front of mind in the long term, all those things come together will ensure that you're getting some benefit out of the introduction of these things. So yes, there are studies, but though if you don't get the context right, it's not going to be successful.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're out of time. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you find this helpful. Please remember to respond to the survey that you'll receive after the session. We really value your feedback. We would love to hear from you and learn more from you about what specific challenges or circumstances you're facing. Thanks, and make it a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.